Hello! So today we're going to take another look at the PMDG Boeing 777 again in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Before we do that, we're going to go and take a look at SimBrief. So if you've never seen SimBrief before, it's a free flight planning tool on the internet that outputs an operational flight plan. So if you've ever seen the aircrew walking through an airport when you've been going on holiday and you've seen them carrying a folder full of paperwork to the aircraft, or you've looked out while having a coffee in departures and seen the crew down in the cockpit sat either talking amongst themselves or having that folder of paper on the dashboard of the aircraft, and they're signing various pages and referring to it as they program the aircraft. That is the operational flight plan. So yes, SimBrief generates us an OFP, or operational flight plan, and then we can use it to both program the aircraft manually if we really want to, or we can get the systems on the aircraft to talk directly to SimBrief, which is kind of simulating the systems they have on modern airliners. So obviously back in the day, the crew would program everything from paper, but over time that improved so that then they would take a cartridge onto the aircraft, they plug in, and that would upload the data. And then obviously with wireless technology these days, they can request the data from the flight deck, and the avionics systems will, or the flight management computer, will securely acquire the information both on the flight plan and the weather and lots of other things. So yes, we'll work through doing that. We'll show a flavour of doing it manually within the aircraft, and we'll show how you can use the integration as well to help you do it. Okay, so first things first, let's go over to the internet. So we are looking at simbrief.com. You need a Navigraph login to use it. They are free. So you can see I'm logged in as myself. So that's how you can tell the aircraft to talk to SimBrief, but we'll do that later. So we're going to go to dispatch and go to the dispatch system in the SimBrief website. And we're going to create a new flight. So when we create a new flight, we have to fill in from the top left in the form. And we'll say we're going to go from, well, we put in our airline first. So you put in the ICAO code of your airline. So I'm going to make one up. You don't have to have a real one. So I'm going to go Virtual Flight Online, which is VFA for Virtual Flight Airline. And then I'm going to put in my flight number. So I'll just put 123. And my departure airport code. So you can click the magnifying glass if you don't know it. So I can look them up. So I can type in Stansted, for example. So there's EGSS, and we can select that and it will populate it. And if we wanted to go to Edinburgh, for example, if I type in Edin, it's going to do a search. And there's EGPH, so we can select that. So that makes it nice and easy. And we can leave everything else on automatic except the aircraft type. So we need to choose the type of aircraft we're flying. So it's the B77W is the PMDG aircraft, the B777-300ER. Okay, so then it has to think. And what it's done in that few moments is work out, depending on the current weather, the runway to take off from, the runway to arrive on at our destination. It's also gone and simulated and kind of made up payload and passengers. So that's why it says auto, but you can go and change that. And it's also picked a route, which suits where we're flying from and to, given the weather conditions at the moment. Okay? So then we can just go and generate flights. If we want to change that route, we can put whatever we want in. So we can just say generate flight. And it's now making us that operational flight plan, and it keeps it on record for us. Okay, so it gives you a summary immediately of the basics of the flight plan. So if you look down, you can actually see there's our routing information that we might typically use to program a flight management computer with the basics of the route. So you can see here we're going from Stansted, there's our speed and altitude information, then we're going via a standard instrument departure, and then waypoint, airway, waypoint, airway, waypoint, airway, waypoint, airway, a final waypoint, then the standard terminal arrival route. Notice there is no approach listed. Yeah? Okay, so and then the rest of it, you can show details on all this. So you've got the ATC flight plan, you've got the briefing, So let's go and have a look at what you would have seen in the paper version. So this is like a summarized, computerized version of the paper OFP, or Operational Flight Plan. If we click on View the PDF, we get the original. So this is the exact same thing that the crews see. So I'm going to zoom in on it and we'll have a read through it. So at the top, you've got your flight number. So VFA 123. Then you've got today's date, or the date of the flight. Then you've got where you're going from and to, and underneath the full names of the airfield, so Stansted to Edinburgh. You've then got the aircraft type and its registration number, and you've got the release of this document. You've then got the weather, and you've got the prognosis times. So this is when the weather forecast was done. So based on the last two weather forecasts, the information in this document will reflect them. And then you've got the observation times. So this is the times of the weather observations that this document is relying upon. Okay, so then coming down, we've got the flight number, we've got the registration number or tail number of the aircraft. And then you've got the expected departure and takeoff, arrival and gate times for Stansted and Edinburgh. Okay? Or stand time. So then over on the far right, you've got the cost index. So when you're programming the aircraft, that relates to how much fuel you can burn, or how much fuel the aircraft can burn when it's climbing or accelerating. And you've got some other numbers down there that are just like average winds aloft and things like that. And you've got things, the P numbers is the vector of the wind in your face or behind you. So positive means the wind is in your face. And M would denote, we'll see this further in the flight plan as well, it's either P or M. M means it's behind you or negative. So anyway, so planned fuel is next. This is an interesting one. So you get the trip fuel, so estimated fuel burn during your trip. You've got contingency 15 minutes built in, so 1,700. And this will be in pounds, I believe. I'll have to check that. So then you've got the fuel needed to get to your alternative. So the flight plan will have chosen an alternative airport as well. So that's how much fuel you're going to need to get to the alternative. You've then got final reserve fuel. So that's how much of reserves you've got. Then you've got minimum takeoff fuel, which is basically adding those together. And then you've got takeoff fuel, which is the same again, because you may have the option of having some extra fuel on board for whatever reason. I think it's quite funny that you've got extras, reserves, and contingency. It's like an abundance of caution is built in here. So then you've got block fuel, which is obviously the taxi fuel and the takeoff fuel added together. So that's how much fuel you need in the aircraft at the start of your flight. Okay. So, and then at the bottom of that front sheet, you've got the kind of a statement that the pilot has to agree to, and he signs the piece of paper. So pick his pilot in charge. So if you had that in the real aircraft, you would print this, you'd have this, on the dashboard, and you sign it once you've read it and agreed that you've reviewed it. So it's a disclaimer, basically. So if we keep scrolling down, we can see there's the alternate route, and here's our routing for our flight. So this is what we were just looking at in the computer version. So you've got departing from Stansted, runway 04, Utava 1 SID, then waypoint airway, it keeps on going until we get to the standard terminal arrival route into Edinburgh, runway 24. You've got the operational impacts. So yeah, this is your weights. I'm not going to go into too much detail about things that are not to do with routing or winds today, but you can obviously go and read up on all of these tables of information. This is one of these subjects when you look at operational flight plans, the more you look, the more you realize you have questions, and you'll keep reading and keep finding out more, and it really is a huge rabbit hole. So you've got your weight estimates here. Notice these are estimates. So you've got passengers, cargo, payload, the zero fuel, takeoff weight, and so on. So you can see you could put actuals in. It's interesting though, because passengers aren't weighed, are they? So it's always going to be an estimate. So you're going to put in your actual weight. But anyway, Terrain, I guess that they're only counting number of passengers here, aren't they? So you're not actually looking at the weight. Anyway. Terrain clearance check, so it's fairly straightforward. So this is the really interesting bit, the flight log. So we're going to see this because we're going to talk about VNAV along the way. So the flight log has lots and lots of information about every waypoint along your route. Okay, so it's got longitude and latitude of the waypoint, so we can see leaving from Stansted and then going through the various waypoints that are part of the standard instrument departure. So it's interesting to look at these. What do these actually mean? So there's the name of the waypoints, but they've also got the reference number that you could use in the flight management computer to program that waypoint in. So although it may be called that, if you go from the ISED waypoint, which I think is an NDB, you can then go 44 degrees from it. I can't highlight that. Look, the browser's being a so-and-so. So if you go from ISED for 44 degrees and 2 miles, you will get that exact location, longitude and latitude. Okay, so the interesting column to us, other than longitude and latitudes, is the flight level, the MORA, so that's the minimum off-reference altitude. No, sorry, off-route altitude, sorry. So we've got, for each of these waypoints, you've got the flight level that's been calculated based on the performance of the aircraft. Then you've got the minimum off-route altitude that you can be at that waypoint. And then you've got the distance from the previous waypoint that this waypoint is. Okay? And then you've got the wind component at each waypoint. So you've got a forecast wind that you will be experiencing at that altitude and position. So this could all be programmed by hand into the aircraft if you really wanted to. And I can show you where you will do it, but obviously we're not going to because we'll be here all day. It's interesting though, isn't it? You've got estimated fuel burn all the way down, so you can see the fuel number coming down. So that's estimated fuel on block and actual fuel on block. So you could be writing in how much fuel you've actually got as you pass each waypoint into the operational flight plan. So as you do your flight, and you've got the same here, look, estimated time and actual time. And it hasn't actually done it, look. It's interesting that it doesn't do that. Okay, so that obviously goes on for several pages because there's lots of waypoints on our route. So it just shows you the amount of data being crunched is enormous. So that's as far as we're going to look through the operational flight plan today. If we keep on scrolling down and look through the pages, it gets really interesting because you've got notices to airmen start to come in here. So you've got anything you need to know about from the destination airport detailed info, for example. There may be something that's happening today we need to know about, so we need to at least scan over this. So you can see there's a crane in Craig Park Quarry in Edinburgh, so obviously something that might be quite tall. And there's various restricted areas along the route, and you'll get warnings about, your GPS might play up at a particular point in the route or something like that. If there's like some sort of scanning or disruption to radio frequencies in the area, it'll all be in here, and it goes on for pages. So the further you go, the more, like I said, the further you go down the rabbit hole, the deeper the rabbit hole gets. And you get a load of charts that have been processed as well. So you get things like winds aloft and things like that with the wind barbs showing you the wind you're going to experience on your route. Okay, so let's jump back over to the aircraft now and have a look inside. So if we go jump inside, so the quick way to fire up the airplane is just to go and load the state in the FMC. We're not going to do that. We're going to go overhead. We're going to do this somewhat correctly today. So we'll go and turn the battery on. So that's over here, battery on. Then we'll come down to the tablet, which should be here. We're going to click it. So I've learned 2 new things today, actually. I'll show you them. So looking from the pilot's eye view, if you click on the bottom right quarter of the window at the side of the aircraft, it will put the tablet there. If you click on this little black connector here on the side of the fascia, it will put the tablet there. If you click the strip above the eCam screen down here and click on it, it will put a hovering hand holding the tablet over there, which is really useful if you're transferring information between the tablet and your your programming of the aircraft. So to move it away from there, you need to click on one of the other places. You can also put the tablet away. So if you click on the book down here, it unplugs the tablet and stows it down here. If we go in then and click on somewhere we want it again, it reappears. So first thing we want to do then is go and provide some power to the aircraft before we flatten the batteries. So we're going to go and request ground power from the ground services application, or ground operations, sorry. So we went in there and we requested ground power. Having done that, if we go and look overhead again, we'll now find that the external power is available, so we can plug into it and the aircraft starts to come alive. I'm just going to go and change my audio source so I can hear the same things you are hearing. Okay, so now we've got the aircraft with power. The systems will slowly come up, but before we do that, let's go and put the APU on as well. Bear in mind the APU is going to be drinking fuel while it's running. It's a small jet engine after all. So we'll come back down and you'll see the first thing to come up is the flight management computer, but it's only dim on the screen at the moment. It isn't even showing us FMC. The reason for that, we need to go and turn on ADIRU as well. So that's the internal guidance, the inertial reference unit, which measures acceleration of the aircraft to know where you are. We'll also turn on the emergency lights while we're here and cover that up. And we can leave the rest for the rest, you know, as we go through the rest of the procedures later. Because today we're mostly going to be looking at the FMC. So you'll see in time it will come up with the option to go and program our flight plan. So we'll just leave it here. There it goes, look. Notice it's still very dim. So if we just look around the cockpit, you'll see things coming up slowly. So if we go into FMC, it's still dim. On the first page, it shows you the version of the AirRack data. So the database of waypoints that the FMC has. So you can see things are slowly booting up around the aircraft. It takes some time. As soon as the FMC comes online properly, we'll have power to do just about everything. So you'll see the screens slowly light up, and this will brighten up when things have booted up. So just give it a few moments. You can see my controls have just blipped, which was not useful. There we go. So we've gone bright, and you'll suddenly see the rest of it coming online over the next minute or so. So we'll just hang on here, and here we go, look. Various relays are transferring power around the aircraft, and we suddenly have systems coming on. Okay, so let's go back down here. The first thing it wants us to do is enter the inertial position of the aircraft. So we're going to clear that message. We're going to pause in it. We'll pick up the GPS position and then drop it on the inertial position, and that places us in the world. Now we can see, because I've been messing around with the aircraft before we started, and it hasn't actually forgotten everything. What we're going to do is go into route. A good way of wiping out everything in its head, we're going to key in the departure again. And that's wiped out everything. It's emptied its head. So that's a good tip for you, step number one. If you're playing around with systems and you want to empty the flight management computer's head, just rekey the origin on the route page and drop it back in, and it will wipe everything. So in other words, the aeroplane doesn't know where it's going anymore. Yeah, so everything's disappeared off of the navigation display. So if we were going to do this by hand, we would program in where we're going from, and we were programming in where we're going to. So EGPH is Edinburgh. Did I just key that wrong? Yeah, I did. I transposed the two letters. So it just shows you, it does validate everything you do. You can't type garbage in. And we're going to leave standstill on runway 04 today because of the wind. And we could put our flight number in, so we could say VFA123. So these are optional fields with hyphens in. You only have to key in fields with squares in them. So notice we're on route 1 of 2, or page 1 of 2, sorry, of the route. So we can go next page. So this is where we could put in the major points along our route. So if we go and look in Navigraph and we import our flight from SimBrief that we've generated, and it's the Stansted to Edinburgh flight, and there's our basic route. Okay, so in terms of waypoints, you might want to put in Utava, or it's the, if you go and look back at our flight plan, actually that's the easiest place to see this. We'll scroll right back up to the top of our flight plan. You're looking for that routing information. Here we go. So we want Utava is our first waypoint. Yeah, don't include the SID in this, just Utava. So if we were doing this by hand, we would go UTAVA, and it will say direct. We will replace that with the SID afterwards. Then we're going to go to Buzad. So BUZAD. But we don't want to, we want to go via an airway, don't we? So we want Q75, so apologise for that. Q75. So airways on the left, intersections or waypoints on the right. So Q75 to Buzad. So this is the hand way of doing it. I'll just do this once for illustrative purposes, and then we'll go back and show you how the system can help you. So then we want airway T40. The reason I know they are airways is because they have a mixture of letters and numbers, whereas the intersections will always be just alpha, so just letters. So TNT is the next one, and I know if they are 3 letters, they tend to be VORs. So UN57 is another airway. Goes to Pole Hill, or the Pole waypoint. Again, over time you will learn some of their names. Then UN601 to INPIP. So UN601 to INPIP. The interesting thing about doing this is after we activate it, the legs page will fill up with lots and lots of waypoints. So there we go, INPIP, and then that is the start of the star. So this gives you a bit of a trick. This SID ends at Utava, that's why it's called Utava 1S. This star begins at INPIP. So as long as you've got the waypoints in the route that are the end of the SID and the beginning of the star, you won't have a discontinuity. If we then introduce, though, there's no approach in here. That's the star, not the approach into 2.4, because you might say we want ILS. So if we then go and configure an approach when we're setting up the departure and approach, or arrival, it will introduce a gap that it doesn't know about, so it will put a discontinuity in. We'll see that happen right now. So I'm going to activate that and execute it. And if we go into the legs page, you can see there's a load of things we didn't program. We did Utava and Buzad, we didn't do Olney or Welin or Ukapa, or Akupa, sorry. So what's going on there? Let's go and have a look. Between Buzad and the waypoint we actually programmed, which was TNT, that's an airway. So what it has done is programmed all of those kind of intermediate waypoints that are along the airway for us. So it's given us a lot of data. Okay, but you notice at the moment it isn't calculating the speed and altitude we will be at each of them. That's because we haven't told it anything about the aeroplane or how we're going to make the aeroplane behave. Okay, so we're going to start out by going to the departure and arrival page, and we're going to tell it how we're leaving the airport. So runway 04, and we're going to be doing, if we go and look at our route again, the Utava 1S standard instrument departure. So there's runway 04, look, then the Utava 1S. So we've already got 04 chosen. So we go next page, there's Utava 1S. So we've now got both set up for the departure, and we can execute it, which will put it into our flight plan. So if we go and look in the legs page again now, you can see we've got the first few pieces of the standard instrument departure. If we go and look down here, we can see it. D044B, D099G and D099E. And there they are, taking us out to the Barkway waypoint and then Utava. Okay, so that's programmed. Choosing that departure has programmed those waypoints into the legs page. So if we go to departures and arrivals, it's still on the page where we were. We can go to index, and then we can go to the arrival into Edinburgh, and we can choose it. So we were going to go into, let's have a look, runway 24 at Edinburgh via the INPIP 1E standard terminal arrival route. But notice there's no approach mentioned. So we're going to choose ILS 24. That's more than just saying runway 24. This is actually the approach. So that means extra waypoints. And then we're going to be doing the INP 1E standard terminal arrival route. Okay. So then if we execute that and go and look in legs and scroll onto the next page and the next page and the next page and the next page, and there's a discontinuity there, look. So between Tartan and CI24. So let's go and see what that's actually talking about. Because you'll notice in here, we loaded this from SimBrief. It's got the runway, it's got the arrival, it hasn't got the approach, so how we get to the runway. So we'll zoom out and go and have a look. And here we go, look. So it knows we're going runway 24, but we haven't actually said in here, ILS runway 24, add to route. And it leaves a dotted line. It doesn't know how to get from Tartan to CI24. So we could just say go direct. So we'll select CI24, then select the discontinuity, and that will have the action of pulling up those legs to close the discontinuity. Yeah, so we execute that, and that's gone away. So in our flight plan in the aeroplane, we're going to go straight from Tartan to CI24, and then turn to final. Okay, so that's the basic routing done. And if we go and look at legs again now, you'll see it's suddenly got some calculations in here about altitudes along the way, because it's got restrictions that were part of the standard instrument departure. So if we go and have a look at that, we zoom back out and go back down the other end. Now you can't see them on this map. If I pull up the chart for the Utava 1S departure, you can see as we come through Barkway, we have to be between 3,000 and 5,000 feet, so above 3,000. When we get to Barkway, we have to be at 5,000. Yeah? So we can see it here, look, at D099E, we have to be above 3,000, at Barkway at 5,000. Same at Utava. But if we carry on looking next page, it still doesn't know anything about the rest. You know, it should be figuring out the speeds and altitudes. So let's go and have a look in the init refs. The reason it can't do it is we haven't told it enough yet. It knows we're climbing to 360 or 36,000 feet. So is that correct? Let's go and have a look at our flight plan. Should we be climbing to 36,000 feet? So if we go and scroll back up, we can see there's our cost index, by the way. And I can never find these numbers. We're looking for the altitude, 340. Okay, so we got, this is the climb profile. So it's saying basically we're going to climb straight to 34,000 feet. So flight level 340. Okay, so let's go and have a look. So we're going to put in 340 instead of 360. We're going to put in, what was the cost index? 70. Then the PMDG will calculate the rest for us, so we can put the reserves in of, now we had a reserve on the fuel plan, didn't we? Where's our final reserves? So we could put 2.8. Okay, and then we can go thrust limit, and we can arrange our climb profile if we want to, and we can go to takeoff. We can set our flaps, so 15 for example, and it's gone and calculated the reference speeds. But there's something interesting I want to show you as well beyond this. We can do the centre of gravity as well. There's two pages on the takeoff preferences. So if we go next page, we can put in the wind at the departure airfield. So we can go and click on Stansted, for example, open the airport, go to the weather page, and we can see the wind is 240 at 5 knots. So we can put 240/05 and we can drop that in. Now notice, look, takeoff speeds have been deleted. Because it now knows more, the speeds will be different because there'll be some wind potentially in our face as we go down the runway. So we can come back to the previous page and we can reconfirm the numbers. They haven't actually changed, look, but there you go. Okay. So we go back to takeoff and that's done. So this is where the computer system now has enough information to figure everything out. It knows where we're climbing to, the cost index, and the weights of the aircraft and everything. So we can see, if we go next page, it's now calculated the speeds and the altitudes at every waypoint along the route. So these are estimates, and it's taking into account the restrictions along the way. So they will be different, or they won't match up, I should say, with the flight info we saw earlier. They won't match up with this table of the flight log, because this shows estimates without any restrictions being involved, which is why it only has the minimum off-route altitude. Yeah? So it's got the minimums in here, it hasn't got the estimateds, because anything could happen on the route. And yeah, and the real story here, because I did, again, rabbit hole, the real story here is, are those SIDS and stars, their charts, so the pilots are hopefully following the route that the ATC presumes they are following. The air traffic controller may instruct the pilot to deviate from the SID or the star, because you may have another aircraft crosses, you know, your path, or there may be anything could happen, and the ATC could instruct you to deviate. Therefore, all of that paperwork goes out the window. So there's no point in the paperwork having too much detail in that regard. It has the minima for it. Okay, so we can see we could do quite a lot there, but you'll also see, looking on the legs page, for all of these legs, and there's pages of them, we could also go to route data, and you can see there's the fuel burn down along the way, but there's also wind. So at every single waypoint, we could fill in winds aloft at that waypoint, which was in here. But this is why doing it by hand would take all day. So we're not going to. What we're going to do is, I'm now going to show you the SimBrief method of doing this to get the aeroplane to actually connect to the world and to pull the information into itself for us. So we're going to go back to that route page and we're going to key in EGSS to make it forget everything we've just done. Okay? Bang. So it's telling us, look, what is deleted along the way, and that's fine. So what we're going to do, if we go and do route request, it can see it's got a SimBrief route. The reason it's got a SimBrief route is because I did it earlier, to be honest, but if we come back into the tablet, we can come in here and we can go to the electronic flight bag and we can request data from SimBrief, and that will get our current plan. Yeah? You'll notice as well over here, I'll just turn that off, that wouldn't have been on by default. So there's our details of our flight that we programmed into SimBrief. If we click the little graph over here, the altitude profile, that also shows you, based on the performance of your aircraft and what's in the flight plan, the altitude profile it would like you to follow during your route if you follow the flight plan. And that's based on this. Okay? So, how do we get that into the flight management computer? We do a route request. So we're on the route page. We don't even have to have the origin programmed in, so we could clear that out just to show you this. Or do we do delete? I can never remember how this works. No. So you can't actually delete what's in that field. Anyway, we're going to do a route request. And it will show you, as long as you've gone and connected the tablet already to SimBrief, it will show you the one that's in the tablet, the route that's in the tablet. The one above it is any files you've put in the file system that are in the right place for the aeroplane to be able to see them. But we're not, we're just going to say SimBrief. Yeah? So we can then set the payload according to that SimBrief plan, and we can set the fuel according to that SimBrief plan. So you can see the messages have come up there. So we'll clear them both back out, and then we select the route, and we wait. So route is requesting, and it simulates how long it takes in the real world. So our request has been sent, and we just sit and wait. So here we go, route uplink. And it's saying wind data uplink is ready. So there's lots of other information that's come through that are available to us now. So we can load that into the aeroplane. So we say load. Route 1 uplink is loading. So we just sit and wait again. And we wait for a while. So what it's doing is filling in the flight management computer with the route and all of the data. Okay. So it's got that far, we wait a bit longer, so wind data uplink is ready. I can never remember if this is the point where you can carry on or not. I think we will. So we'll just say activate, okay? And we execute that. So having done that, if we go and look in the next page of the route, you will see the whole programming of our route has been put in here. But you can also see it says wind data uplink ready. Okay, so what we're going to do is go performance initialization. We'll just follow the route through the FMC, and I'll point things out along the way, that things we can have extra data for now. So that was performance initialization. We'll accept what has been pulled down into the aeroplane. So we can do a performance initialization request as well. So if we do that, requesting, and it will redo the same data, but it's just to show you can do that. So the request has been sent, and then it will come back and we'll be able to accept it. There we go, look, performance initialization uplink has happened, so we can accept the data, and it's done it all for us. So thrust limit, we can leave that as it is. Go to takeoff, and this is where it gets interesting again. So we haven't got V-speeds yet because we haven't set the departure of what runway we're leaving on. So if we go to the departure and choose runway 04 and the was it Utava 1S? Let's just double check that. So we go look at the route. So Utava 1S, yes it was, and we can execute that. So then if we went back into init refs, you can see it's now got the V-speeds because it knows what runway we're taking off on. It knows about the wind. So but notice though, takeoff 1 of 2, so we go next page. It's got all the wind data. Yeah, remember when it said it had the winds? So we can come previous page, we can go thrust limit, so that just circles round then, back between those two pages. So the init refs are done. We can say how we're arriving at Edinburgh along the way. So if we go to the index page for departure and arrivals, we can say, remember, SimBrief doesn't give you the departure or the arrival, so it only gives you the route. So we're going to go ILS24, and it was the IN-P1E, wasn't it? And execute, and again, we'll still have that same discontinuity to go sort out. So for all of this cleverness, it doesn't know everything. But where it is clever is we can pull up the route data now, and if we go and look in here, we can load wind data from SimBrief. So we'll do it. We're doing the request has happened, and it's modified the wind on all of the waypoints where it can. So execute, so where there was information available. So if we now go and look in any of these waypoints along the route, it's got all of the winds or the forecasts for the flight levels along our route. It's really clever, isn't it? There's a ton of information. So providing all of this information to the aeroplane, you're making the flight management computer more and more accurate in terms of estimating your route and being able to help you. And the end goal of all of this is if you've got all of the information in here, then VNAV can work correctly. So having done that, we've done the departure and arrival, we've done the legs, we've got rid of discontinuities, we've done the init refs, which tells you how the aeroplane's going to be behaving. The last thing we want to do is go to VNAV. So in VNAV, we get to control, there's 3 pages worth of it, look. So we've got any speed restrictions that we might want to go in over the top of, well, let's just have a look at bit by bit. There's our cruise flight level. So we want that to be 330. Okay, execute. So then it goes and calculates your most economical speed. It's clever, isn't it? Then you've got below 10,000 feet, 250 knot limit, so you could obviously change that. You've also got your transition altitude. So that's correct for the airport we're taking off from. And that means it will tell you and start flashing when you go through the transition altitude. That's how it knows. It's also how it knows to put the limit on the indicated airspeed ribbon about the altitude, you know, speeds at altitudes. It's clever, isn't it? So if we go next page, you can see you've got the estimated fuels there, and if you go next page again, you've got the speed and the wind. Yeah, the wind. So not the wind, sorry, the speed at the transition altitude. And if you go to forecast, you've got the wind. So you could do a uplink load. So let's go and request it. So there's your descent forecast as well. It's clever, isn't it? So much information. But it's giving the airplane more and more to use. So when the aircraft is doing VNAV, it means it will have all the information to accurately estimate what's going on. And by having all of that information, when we come to operate VNAV later on in the flight, then it will behave itself, and it won't go and suddenly say things like, oh, we don't appear to have enough fuel, or anything strange like that. Because it's got all of those calculations in play, it can work out how best to operate the aeroplane. So having done that, we can then go on and start the aeroplane up. So let's go and do that. So at the moment we are on ground power, we're on the battery, we've got the APU running, we've got ADIRU up and running. Let's just go and check that. So ADIRU was on. So we're going to carry on with the rest of our checklist basically. So IFE pass and cabin utility is good. Emergency lights can be armed, they are. We can go and uncage the passenger oxygen now. Obviously you would close the doors. I've missed out things you don't need to do necessarily in the simulator, so this is very much a functional functional procedure from now. So then we can go down to the flight management computer. We've already done everything in it. We don't have to do any of that today. And then master control panel, so control 1. We're going to go and make this agree with what we programmed in. So the autopilot, unless you're in VNAV mode, isn't going to do necessarily what the flight plan says, because you may have it in a different mode, but you are going to back it up with the basics. So typically air traffic services would give you an initial climb altitude, but we don't have anybody talking to us, so we're just going to go straight for our cruise altitude. So the trick behind this, and the thing you need to know about, is even if you're operating in LNAV mode, LNAV is only going to go as far as your target altitude, so it will follow all of the restrictions or the estimated climb altitudes at each leg. It will blindly follow it, but only as far as your target altitude. So if you've not set that to your cruise altitude and you're on LNAV, it will only get to your target altitude and then we'll go to altitude hold. By the same token, if you still left this at say 30,000 feet and you're descending into somewhere and you've left it on LNAV thinking it will just descend for you, no, it won't. It's going to your target altitude. So even though it might be saying, oh, I could descend down to 3,000 feet now, it won't, because you haven't actually set your target altitude. So before you start descending, you need to go and change it. Does that make sense? And then LNAV will listen to that, and at the point it needs to start descending, it will start descending. And not until then. Okay, so flight directors need to go on. So that connects effectively the master control of the aircraft or the flight computer connects the flight computer to the autopilot. The autopilot is essentially dumb. It just operates the aeroplane. The flight directors and the flight management computer together are the brains. Okay, so we also need to go and set the heading, again a backup. So we're going to set this to the runway direction for takeoff. So 04, wasn't it? So I've gone all the way around the compass there the wrong way, haven't I? Completely forgot. I'm so used to taking off runway 22 at Stansted. So we can select that altitude. If we do that, it will say heading select, but then we can say lateral navigation, and it will say both. So that means as soon as it captures the GPS track, or as soon as it's close to it, it will drop heading select and go for LNAV. Okay, we can go and pre-select VNAV, and that means as soon as we take off, it's going to go for, you can see there, look, it's going to go for toga on the way down the runway, and as soon as we pull off the ground, it will use the climb profile for the throttle that's detailed in here with the speeds. Makes sense? So for example, if we went to vertical speed mode, that will change. But we don't want to use vertical speed mode, we want to use VNAV mode. So that's going to use vertical speed and then drop it when it gets off the ground and go for VNAV. We can't pre-arm the auto throttle, which I always find rather interesting. Different aeroplanes behave in different ways with that, as far as I've seen. So again, that's just based on my observations, not on anything from a book. It's just different aeroplanes are slightly different than each other. Okay, so we want to go and put the auto brakes to rejected takeoff, which means they'll be pressurized, ready to go at a moment's notice if they ever need to. We need to calibrate the altimeter, so we'll press B to shortcut that. If you're doing it by hand, you can just spin the baro knob for the local barometric pressure. Another way of doing that is if you know the altitude of the airport, you just turn the baro knob until the altitude is correct, and that will give you the correct barometric pressure. So it works both ways. Transponder. So again, you can leave it on TARA, then at least it will go off when you're taxiing around if someone comes too near to you. So you can turn on the display as well with the radius rings if you really want to on the navigation display. And then we're going to get ready to start engines soon. So we're going to go and put the beacon light on at this point, and we're going to go and put the fuel pumps on. So fuel pumps are over here. So we'll go and turn on forward and aft, left and right. We've got no fuel in the centre tanks, I don't think, today. You can tell if you have or not. Yeah, there you go, look. It comes up with a pressure problem because there's no fuel in them. Okay. So before we do pushback, we need to come back into the tablet and we need to go to ground operations and remove the wheel chocks, remove the ground power. Make sure that the parking brake is off, and then we can press Shift and P, and you'll see that the tractor pull out to the aeroplane and start pushing us back. So we're going to preempt things a little bit at this point, and we're going to start the engines. So if we go back inside the aeroplane and press Control 6, we're going to do the right engine first. So we rotate the start knob to start, and you'll have heard the fans go off. That's because automatically the compressed air that's being used from the APU to spin up the engines is now spinning up engine number, so it was being used for environmental controls is being used. So we can remove the chocks as well, and that will allow us to go backwards. So yeah, the air that was being used to pressurize the cabin is now being used to spin the engine up. So we can advance the fuel control and the engine will ignite and the fuel will start flowing, and you'll see all of that reflected in these numbers. So fuel flow is now going up, look. The turbofan speed is increasing, the exhaust gas temperature will start to climb, there it goes. So if you see a flicker and a clunk, that will be the engine generating enough electricity to take over from the APU. I'm not sure if it does it in this aircraft. So So we're going to stop the pushback there. And we're going to put the parking brake on for a moment, because there's a risk the aircraft could get enough positive thrust, or if there's a slope in the ground, that it will start to roll. So we can go and start the other engine. Yeah, so I don't think you see the flicker. The more modern aircraft are much more smooth at doing the switchover or bus transfer between APU and engines. So as soon as we get to... Actually, we don't need to wait for the speed anymore. In the 777, you can just turn on fuel control immediately after starting the engine, and it will take care of it itself. It's fully autonomous. So we're just waiting for the aircraft to bring the engines up to speed. And if we look overhead, the switch will go back to the middle on its own when it's ready. There it goes. So now we've got the engines running, we can go... We should have done the window heat by now, by the way. I've gone a little bit off track. Then we can do the hydraulics. We can also... The packs are on auto, so they'll kick on their own. Seatbelt should go to auto. Seatbelt should have been on already. Again, when we were looking at the nav stuff, I missed a load of this out of the checklist, so I'm just double checking things. And we might want to put the logo light on. We're going to go and put the taxi light on now. And we're looking good overhead. Okay. So we can go and have a look over here. So doors are on auto, no smoking is on, APU is still running, so yes, we need to go and turn the APU off. So APU can come off now because engines are running, therefore bus transfer will have happened and they will be generating electric for the aircraft. So auto brake is set to RTO, parking brake is set, APU, and we've got a window flight deck right problem. What is the window flight deck right problem? Ah, we should have locked it. There we go. And it's gone away. So I've been playing with this morning. This is going to probably wreck the air conditioning, but watch. If you slide the... that's a flight plan holder, by the way, or a plate holder. If you crank this backwards, I only discovered this morning, and then crank this wheel, you can open the window. And it works both sides. Isn't that great? We can crank it back shut again. And it will obviously will have come up with a warning, flight deck, left window error. So having cranked that back in, we can then lock it here and close that. And that will make that go away. That's wonderful, isn't it? So the other thing we need to do, the airplane will complain when we get to the runway if we haven't done the checklists. So let's just go and check through them. It's this one here, isn't it? Here we go. So there are several checklists, and it tries to show you the right one in the right order. So we'll go to the pre-flight checklist. Yeah, we've done the oxygen, we did the flight instruments, and then if we do the before start checklist, we did the... well, I think the flight deck door was already shut. You can do all these things, you don't necessarily have to. It won't know if you haven't. Yeah, we've done our MCP, so that was setting up our altitudes and headings and things. Takeoff speeds, we've done that in the MCP. In the FMC. So we've done the CDU pre-flight, so we programmed it, all of the route in. Have we done the trim? I don't believe we have. Oh yes, we did. We programmed it on the FMC, didn't we? So we've done the trim, takeoff and taxi briefing. We haven't got anybody to brief except ourselves. So then we can do the before taxi checklist. So we haven't got anti-ice. It's a lovely day. Flight controls, we haven't actually checked them, but we're going to presume they're going to work. We've cleared the ground equipment away from the aircraft. That's all done. So then we've just got the before takeoff checklist, which was flaps 15, which we have not done, which is why checklists are so good. So I'm just moving the flaps there using my controls to do it. So flaps are now going to 15. You can see them traveling. And this is why checklists are such a good idea. so just waiting for the flaps to travel, and that's a before takeoff checklist. So right, so ladies and gentlemen, finally we're going to hold the toe brakes on, which will automatically release the parking brake. Then we're going to ease the throttles open, and we're rolling. So quick check around the modes. We've got pre-programmed, we've got LNAV and VNAV configured, ready to go. We could go and change this to say 2,000 feet a minute or 2,500 feet a minute for the initial climb, just to get it off the ground, and then it will go to VNAV as soon as it can. So we've got quite a long taxi down to runway 04, but it's not a problem. So if we look out, there's 2 parallel taxiways at Stansted. So it's obviously quite a busy airport, but it's only got the 1 runway. So to allow traffic to avoid each other, there's 2 taxiways. Okay, let's just speed up a little bit, but not too fast. So it's saying here we got no V speeds, so let's go and have a look at that. So if we go to init refs, thrust limit, takeoff, yeah, we had, where we had put the winds in, it cancelled out the speeds. So now we have got V speeds. So you just need to be aware of that. So if you're going to change the wind, the speeds are going to need to be recalculated. And it does prompt you, you saw there, the indicated airspeed ribbon said that we haven't got any V speeds calculated, and it's really handy to have them, so it pays to have them. So again, I mentioned several times during the monologue that there's a rabbit hole here in terms of the symbology on all the displays. All these little marks mean things, and without having the pilot operating handbook of a 777, it's difficult to know. Or I think the PMDG documentation probably does cover it, but what those little markers mean is anyone's guess, and how many lines are on them will have a meaning as well. It may well be the laws that the FMC is going to operate the aircraft under, or that the guidance system. So it's doing the bell there where it tells the cabin crew tell the passengers to, or so the pilots tell the cabin crew to go and sit and get their positions ready for takeoff. Cabin ready, doors auto, no smoking on, auto brake RTO. So they're basically, that's the bing from the cabin then saying they're ready. Because there's all those other bits, you think of the real pilots, they talk, don't they, to the passengers along the way about informing them, what the route is today, what they're planning to do, and then they talk to the cabin crew and instruct them, say, please take your seats, and there's a whole raft of things that they work through. So we'll go and get the before takeoff checklist. We've already done flaps, so that was fine. So after takeoff, there's obviously landing gear and flaps to deal with. Told you it's going to be a long taxi, didn't I? But yeah, I just love that these aircraft are simulated so accurately that you can go through all of these procedures and deal with all this data. It's amazing, isn't it, that we can do any of this, really. Okay, should we put the head tracking on just so we can look around as we're doing this taxiing? So obviously real world you would stop, but we're not going to because I've switched all the other aircraft off so we don't get distracted while we're doing this kind of demonstration. Okay, so we pull it out onto the runway. We obviously then would wait in the real world for our clearance to take off. And we go full throttle. There is an option on the throttles to press a toga button to make it do this for us. So I've just gone full throttle to illustrate that you can run the engines above 100%. They've gone to 106, look. So I'm going to pull them back a little bit. So we rotate gently, gear up, and then autopilot is on. I've done that quite early, but you can see it's kicked in with VNAV, and we need to make sure auto throttlers come on automatically, and then we're just controlling the flaps now. So as the flaps come up, you'll notice the indicated airspeed limit is going up to 240 knots. That was programmed into VNAV, remember? The fastest it's going to go is 240. And now it's going out to 250 as the altitude increases, but the restrictions come into play. So if we go and look in here, we've got to be above 3,000, but there's a 5,000 limit at D099G. And there's another 5,000 limit at Barkway, and another one at Utava. So until we get to Utava, we're staying at 5,000 feet. You can see the aircraft has leveled out and cut the throttles back to go no faster than 250 knots. So that's the indicated airspeed limit. We didn't put the lights on, did we? And that wasn't on the checklist either. Interesting, all the strobes. So there's some procedural things. I'm not looking at my own checklist. And I went by this one, and it didn't have the lights on it. That's interesting. So below 10,000 feet, commercial aviation, you should have the landing lights on. Strobe should be on as soon as you're on the runway. Just shows you, trying to fit all this stuff in and talk about it is hard. It's really difficult. Obviously, if you're a professional pilot doing this day in, day out, it's your bread and butter, and you would know you had missed it because you just wouldn't feel right. So we'll hold 5,000 feet, VNAV is on. So VNAV is actually relatively straightforward, but people always ask, why is it I can't get VNAV to work? So we're going to turn that checklist off now, by the way. They'll all ask, why can't I get VNAV to work? And the reason is you haven't given the aircraft enough information in the flight management computer. You have to have the performance data, so the init ref data filled in. You have to have the departure information. You have to get rid of discontinuities from the flight plan. Because until you've got all of that, the numbers won't be calculated for the route. And then beyond that, you can then influence VNAV, as we saw, by correcting what it does and how it behaves. So the cost index on the init refs of telling the aircraft how aggressively it's allowed to accelerate, so how much fuel it can burn, basically. The lower the number, the shallower your climb is going to be, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's interesting. And then obviously while you're flying, you've got the legs page showing you the data, and you can see that route data that we saw earlier with the fuel burn down. You can see the winds that we all had programmed in, and that all relates back to what we saw on the operational flight plan. So we can refer to that during the flight. So while we're flying, we might want to be reading ahead at the next part of the flight, looking at the notices to airmen along the way. So you'll have these various bits of information. It's just interesting, isn't it? So it could keep you really busy reading that ahead of time. Also, something that's worth pointing out, as well as the legs page, you've got a progress page which shows you slightly different information. So you've got some ETAs at the next few waypoints and fuel burn down. So it's kind of a hybrid screen. So distance to go to each waypoint, ETA and the fuel burn down as a summary. It's good, isn't it? Okay, so if we remember looking at our route, once we go past Utava, VNAV should start climbing towards 33,000 feet. So get ready. Watch it. We're about to pass it now, and it's just changed, look. It's going for VNAV speeds, throttles to the reference values that it's allowed to use for the climb. Look at the throttles piling forwards. And we're going up. And we've gone through... Look, it's struggling to hold 250 knots. Sometimes it does. When we come through 6,000, remember... Oh, I thought this might start flashing. Yeah, there it goes. Look, it's put a box around the barometric pressure. That's a reminder to us that we've gone through the transition altitude. So we then need to go and press the button to go to standard barometric pressure, which is 2992 or 1013 hectopascals. So that ensures that above the transition altitude, all of the aircraft in the airspace have got their altimeters calibrated the same as each other. So 5,000 feet to one aircraft, or sorry, 10,000 feet to one aircraft is the same altitude as 10,000 feet in another aircraft. They're all going to be matching each other, so you don't get any risk of aircraft hitting each other that think they're at different altitudes but actually at the same altitude. So from this point on, the route's going to be very boring. Something that will appear later on the screens when you get to descent is a profile marker to show where we are in terms of the descent profile. It doesn't do it on climb, which I always find interesting. It does it on descent. So it will have like a projected line of whether we are above or below where we should be on the descent, given the altitudes that appear in the flight plan in the legs. So if we go, yeah, it's just recalculated, look. So it recalculates this all the time, because as well as us telling it what weather conditions there are, the sensors on the aeroplane also do the same thing. So if you go and look around the aeroplane, I don't know if you ever looked really closely, there's all these little sensors. So when you start putting in the heating for the probes and things, those sensors will be giving the aircraft more up-to-date information about the wind that's hitting the aircraft. So the numbers that appear for the projected times and the fuel burn and everything are being recalculated all the time by the aircraft. They're not just based upon the data that was entered. Okay, so we came up through 10,000 feet some time ago. I'm doing really badly with following procedure, aren't I? We came up through 10,000 feet some time ago. We should have also turned off the lights above 10,000 feet. If we had an ACARS program tracking my progress today, it would be giving me a proper roasting for doing things wrong, or not doing them in a timely manner. So we can go out to Navigraph and we can watch our aeroplane following the route. It's just turning at Buzad. So you can see we're banking as we speak. And about to start the long stretch up towards Edinburgh. So I'm not going to follow the entire route today, but it was just to show you really, looking at the flight plans, at the operational flight plan, interpreting what it actually means in that operational flight plan. We also looked at programming all of the parameters into the flight management computer of the aircraft to make sure that VNAV is accurate. So the more information you give it, so in terms of the winds and the performance of the aircraft and your intended cruise altitude and the climb profile, the takeoff data, the descent data, so it's worth looking at that actually. when we go and look at the VNAV information, so you've got climb information there, and we go next page, you've got the cruise information for VNAV, next page, and you've got the descent information. So we can fetch the forecast at our destination. It's already got it, but we could re-request it during the flight. So it's all the accuracy of VNAV, what I'm trying to get at, is entirely dependent on how much information it has. So we've sent our request. So we wait. And we can load the data that's come back. Okay, that's done. It's good, isn't it? So when anybody says, oh, you know, I was on VNAV and the aircraft didn't descend properly or whatever, it usually means that the aircraft didn't have enough information. Therefore, its attempt to come down on a profile failed. You'll also see, depending on the conditions, VNAV might ask you for help. So during the descent, it will ask you to help retard speed, and it will come up with a warning, and that's when you bring the spoilers into play. Yeah, so I think it does it right here where it says throttle reference at the moment. It will come up saying retard. And all it means is that VNAV can't do this on its own. The winds may be changed and you've got a tailwind or whatever it is, and it can't slow down and descend at a good enough rate to match the profile. Anyway, I'm not going to do the whole flight because you don't want to sit here and listen to me for another hour whittering away. So I'm going to leave it there, and hopefully you found that interesting today. I'll see you again soon. Take care.